Hey everyone, welcome to Friendly Ties. We are going sailing today on the shiniest river you've ever been on. It is the River of Gold. So we're gonna chat River of Gold today. I just finished playing my very first game. I'm the rookie here. John, you've played two times now, right? And Anastasia,
yeah, I'm a seasoned veteran.
Yeah. And Anastasia, you got into it and started jamming it on BGA.
BGA, yeah. This is my fifth play in I think 48 hours. Like I think I think John and I played this on Monday night, and it's a Wednesday, so
I think that's true. Yes.
So it's still relatively new, but yeah. 5 plays in.
I've been curious about this one for a while. It came out at Gen Con just a couple of months ago. And then, Anastasia and I were like, let's play something this arbitrarily. And I was like, I've heard this game is cool. And we did this thing that I've never done before, where we turned on Board Game Arena and we skimmed the rules for like 3 minutes. And then we just started trying to play the game because Board Game Arena
clicking
tells you what to do. And we got through a full game in 80 minutes. And we both like chatted about it for like 20 minutes after. And then we roped Nick in. And we literally stopped our first game like 15 minutes ago, and we swore ourselves to silence. We haven't said anything about our impressions of this three-player game.
I don't even know if Nick liked it. I don't know anything. Yeah, this is our... This is going to be all caught live here.
Wait, give me some facts. Is this a publisher or designer that I know?
The designer is Keith Pigot, I believe, and I am not familiar with them. They've got 5 credits on BGG, but the publisher is Office Dog, and they are a couple of years old. They were a new kind of subsidiary of Asmodee. So they've got big backing and all that kind of stuff. And they've put out some good-looking games, but not a whole lot of games overall so far. And I heard about this game because it just like minor buzz, essentially, just on the internet. Just like, I don't know, social media. I kept hearing like, River of Gold, good. River of Gold, good. And then we had the opportunity to try it. And I really liked it. I've really enjoyed it. We'll talk about that more soon. But I guess the hype machine worked here.
Well, we've only played it online, but I do have to say, after we played it, I did look up some pictures of it, and my goodness, does it look like it is very pretty in person. So I think when you said shiny river, you weren't kidding.
Literally. The board is like
literally
metallic.
A shiny river.
Oh, they have like the filigree thing like they do with the... what's the other game they do that in? The CGE game, Kutna.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Also a shiny game.
Yeah, it looks fantastic. In fact, I've already got a copy on my wish list, which is just going to speak to what I thought of the game.
The fact that it's on your wish list and not in your mailbox is the part that actually is maybe surprising.
Yeah. Middling review. It's not your house
guys. Guys, I am a new woman. I'm going to try and trade for it. That's not going to happen. But I'm going to wait until it's close enough to Christmas that I can call it a Christmas gift. Or I might buy it tomorrow and play with my friend on Friday. We'll see.
I'd like to do just like an incredibly quick, just high-level overview of this game, just to get people in line with it. And actually, I'm going to start this by saying it's a surprisingly quick teach. Like, there's a lot of icons and stuff like that. But
shockingly simple for how complex it looks.
Yeah. The core of the game is you have a long, skinny board with a river going down the middle of it with a whole bunch of spaces, like stops on that river. Everyone has 2 boats. And it's a loop, essentially. And on your turn, you will have a die that's rolled. It's a d6. And you're going to either sail down the river equal to that amount. So if you roll a 3, you move exactly 3 spaces. Then you get everything where you landed. Or you can use that 3 to build in the 3 area. And then that's going to be on the river. So then when people sail to that spot, you get stuff and they get stuff. And the third thing is you can play a card from your hand that has a 3 on it to then spend your resources to play the card. It gives you stuff, gives you ongoing stuff, victory points. But you may have noticed the through line is you rolled a 3 on your die, and all of the actions that you do are associated with a 3. But at the beginning of your turn, you can spend a resource, Divine Intervention, to change the value of that die. And then you roll the die at the end of your turn. The next person goes, and you just do that for a while.
Yeah, instead of multi-use cards, it's a multi-use die, right? And it's interesting because there's 3 actions you describe: building, moving, and playing a card out of your hand. And building spends the money. Playing card out of your hand spends resources like your what is it, like silk and
porcelain and rice.
The goods.
Yeah.
Three different goods. And then moving in the river gets you resources, and you got 2 different boats that you can move. So it's 3 actions, but 4 options because you have 2 boats to 2 different boats in like different spaces, which gives you a limited number of choices, but quite like I think that like on your turn getting to choose 3 to 4 options is like a very good decision space. I think that's like if I was going to put one thing on a pedestal the most in this game, it is that they nail the space that your decision making is. It feels really appropriate. And of those action choices, the one that's like playing a card from your hand is kind of binary because it's like, does the number on the die match the number in your hand? If you're going to complain about bad luck in this game, it's going to be because the die is not matching the number you want to play on a card in your hand. But you can absolutely make something work with your boat sailing, or by choosing to take the build action in like a various different region based on your die roll. So I really like the space that roll a die and then react to this creates for a player.
Yeah, and roll a die at the end of your
absolutely.
turn. So you're thinking about what you're going to do when everybody else is going.
Yep.
Which really helps with the AP, I think, like that just that subtle thing, and obviously you can do that in a lot of games, but I do like that is just like called out immediately, like end your turn, roll your die, and then sit there and ponder your choices. So you're always thinking. And this game has, one of the ways that these pieces kind of work together is that when you build those buildings, you're going to build them on this river of gold. And the buildings have these really lovely incentives where you get something when you build them, but you also create an opportunity for other people to get things from them when they sail, and for you to continue getting an ongoing benefit when people activate them. So I love a game like that. It's funny. Boone Lake is probably not the best example of this, but for some reason this reminded me quite a bit of Boone Lake, of something, but also that idea of like when you do something, it does something for other people. And it's interesting because it's not in the actual mechanics of the game, but it is, it's not like action selection where, I do an action and then someone else gets a benefit, but still those little benefits that you can get on other people's turns. It's just, there's always kind of something happening. So that really helps with what could be otherwise a little bit of an AP fest. It never really drags like that because you always have something to think about and you're getting little benefits depending on what someone does. And
it's reverse,
I really like that.
It's reverse Great Western Trail, right? Where it's like, instead of paying taxes
Perfect
when you land
example.
on someone's building, they just get a benny from
Even
the
better
bank.
example.
Yeah, it's kind of
absolutely.
like a communal engine. It's not an engine, but like it's a communal incentivizer. It's an incentivizer because like the river starts out mostly empty. There's some like basic buildings and stuff that like here's $1 or $2 or whatever. But yeah, it really fills in. And going back, like the reason I kind of emphasize the die rolling at the end of your turn instead of the beginning is because in this play that we just did, the 3-player game, it's only my second play. I would say on a quarter to a third of my turns, I was sitting there like a kid on Christmas waiting for it to be my turn. Like, the turn order was like Nick, then me, then Anastasia, then Nick, then me. And numerous times, not because you two were taking too long in your turns. You weren't at all. But I'd roll the die in my turn. I was like, yes, I got exactly what I wanted, or within one, and I can manipulate it. And I'm just like sitting there waiting. And then Nick says he's done with his turn. I'm like, yeah, all right, there we go. Bang, 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 bang. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm like so excited to do the thing. And I think it's because you can think about it when it's not your turn. And also I think it's because this game is just get stuff. Just get stuff. And it lets you do stuff. So while you're trying to get silk or something like that, you're also just happen to be getting money, and then you turn around and you're like, wait, I got $15. I could spend this stuff. And you spend the money, and then suddenly you have like 2 porcelain. You're like, wait a minute, I could spend that to play a card from my hand. I was surprised, at least, especially my first play, a little bit less than this one. But in the first play, I felt like every time I wanted to do something, I had exactly enough stuff to do it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was kind of fun. It was just like I wanted to do the cool thing, and it kept letting me do the cool thing. In the second play that we just did, there were a couple times it was like, I need one more rice, so I'm going to go out there and get one more rice. But even then, it wasn't a huge stretch to try and do the things that I wanted to do.
Yeah. What do you guys think this mechanism is called? This like roll one day. So I want to call it like dice action selection, but it it isn't that. Like I love that it's just one like roll a die, but it has the feeling for me like all of my favorite like dice placement games. Like everyone take a shot when I mention Grand Austria Hotel.
But you draft a dice in Grand Austria Hotel, right? I think actually Castles of Burgundy is maybe a little bit closer.
Ooh,
because you roll and then you have to decide based on the numbers.
This is going to be a theme for tonight. I'm going to come up with an example of a game, and Nick's going to come up with a better one.
Yeah, that hadn't occurred to me. That's a perfect example.
That is a perfect example. Castles of Burgundy is a great example of this. Okay, but to make my Grand Austria Hotel point, just in vibe, right? Like, I love a game where the dice are dictating your actions, but you still feel like you have a lot of choice. Because what's so interesting about this is that, sure, I rolled a 1, but I don't just do one thing with it, right? Which is exactly why Castles of Burgundy is such a great example of this. It's like, it's more so that what of the action types do I want to do with this one die? Like, because it dictates where you can build on the river. It dictates the cards you can play. It dictates how far you can sail. Like, I just think that is so clever and done so well here. And again, to reiterate Nick's point, just in a decision space that is just wide enough to be really thinky, but not so wide that it's completely overwhelming.
Yeah. It almost feels like, I probably didn't start this way, but it almost feels like a modern roll and move game. You know, because you have these 3 actions and one of them is move, and you have to move the exact amount that you rolled, but you can modify it with this kind of resource. But then it kind of expounds from that. Like, oh, well, there's 2 different pawns that you can move. Okay, cool. But then there's these other things that you can do. But also, if you really want to build, but you rolled poorly for it, or you really want to deliver, but you rolled poorly for it, your fallback is move and get stuff. And then you have 2 options for that as well. So I really like how that kind of worked out. So we've talked about moving and we talked about dice, but buildings are really fascinating in this game. There's a ton of building spots down this river, like 25. I didn't count it. I'm just looking at an image. It's a lot of different spots. And every position that you move your boat onto has 4 different benefits. Every position is touching 4 different buildings as you go down this river, and then you activate all 4 things. So that's another good thing about the moving. But the buildings, as we kind of alluded to, like if I build a building, then there's an owner's bonus, and then there's an everyone bonus. And so if Anastasia goes onto my building, she gets the everyone bonus, and then I get the owner's bonus. If I go onto my own building, I get the everyone bonus and the owner's bonus. So by constructing things, you give yourself spots that you really want to go to because it's really good to you. But also, you're making really good spots for other people. And we saw that big time in this second game. You know, I played 2 players and 3 players, just once each. And I remember when we finished our 2-player game, my first thought was, A, that was fun, and B, I really want to try this with more people. Not because it was bad at 2, but because we weren't really activating each other's buildings that much because there's only 2 of us. And I really wanted to see more of that. And we so did in this play that we just did. Like, we constructed a decent amount, and we were activating each other's buildings like crazy. So I won. Just gonna preface that.
I don't want to talk about it.
I beat Anastasia by 3 points, but
I go and play it on BGA. I'm undefeated. I'm feeling so good. I'm like, guys, I'm coming into this with 4 plays. I'm gonna win, right? Like, I've got a leg up. I practiced. I trained.
So
lose to John by 3 points.
I'm not gloating. I'm saying this to make a point in that you constructed 3 buildings around a single river spot that also had a starting building on it. So there are 4 different good things when you go there, and you got a bunch of good stuff there. But what was also there was 7 victory points between 2 2s and a 3 that you put down. And I hit that spot 3 times throughout the game. Like, my final score is 103. 21 points of that 103, a quarter of my score came because of the buildings you built. And I think that's really interesting.
It's fun because it's communal. And so you really are creating this river of gold for everyone. And sure, you get a little extra benefit, but you're not like, it's not so good for your opponents that you're going to like avoid going to their spaces. And I really like that.
Yeah, I'm curious what the answer to that would be with people who are playing a lot more. I think one thing that I want to highlight, and most that John already mentioned, is that this dynamic makes a 2-player game or a 4-player game, I think, feel very, very different from each other, is my suspicion, having just played once at 3 players. But I think that like you get stuff versus I suspect the math there from like what I can suss out is that in a 2-player game, it's probably bad to land on your opponent's building almost every time. But in a 4-player game, that turns around differently. Not because the rewards are different, but because of the relative difference you're making against your other opponents versus the one who's getting all the bennies.
Yeah. Also, you probably like can't throw a rock without hitting somebody's building in a 4-player game.
Right, exactly.
Right. It's just gonna like fill up so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I will say this. So I played it the 5 times. So 4 of those times were 2-player, and then this last time, obviously we just finished, was 3-player. And after my first 2-player game with John, I had the same I had the same thought as you. Like I was like, I think it's going to be better with 3. There'll be more interaction. There'll be more spaces on the board. That was kind of my takeaway. Having played it more at 2-player, I started to see that what's really cool about this game is that sometimes you're focused on the river. Sometimes, we haven't even touched on the tracks. We're going to talk about that in a second, I'm sure.
Yes.
But sometimes you're focused on the tracks. Sometimes you're focused on your cards because, you get points at the end of the game for the number of customers that you played, and they each have additional end game points. And, we're going to talk about that. There are 3 mastery goals, and in 2-player, it's I get it and you don't get it, right? And so there's a kind of a different focus that comes in on each game. And so while, yes, the river could be more interesting with more players, that's just if that happens to be the focus of the game that you're playing. Like I was a little worried that this game was going to be a little bit samey, and I have realized as I played it, I'm like, yes, sure, lots of things are the same, and but there's quite a bit of difference, and because it's not an overly long game. That's another beauty of it. Like we just played it in an hour, you know, and it's a fast game. But the kind of the beauty of the small economy that it's making is that if there's a lot of goods at play, then maybe you're building more customers. If there's a lot of money at play, then maybe you're building more buildings. And it's kind of dictated by the things that come out and kind of points the game in a little bit of just a subtle direction that does make it feel a little bit different each time. And I think that helps kind of balance it out at the player counts.
Yeah, I've loved this conversation already because of 2 comparisons that were made, a Castles of Burgundy and the other is Great Western Trail. And I just want to kind of highlight that because Nick said Great Western Trail and my brain just kind of exploded. I'm really enjoying this game. I played it twice. And the primary thing I complained about in our episode about Great Western Trail was that I desperately wanted a rondel game where we all built something cool together and it varied. As opposed to, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize it, but I just played the game that I think I wanted Great Western Trail to be. I mean, it's much lighter.
They designed your Great Western
Trail. Much lighter and whatnot, but just going, like, kind of dovetailing and supporting what you just said. Yeah, in our first play, I ended with 6 customers, and you get a pile of points for putting out customer cards, and it actually caps at 6. If you get a 7th customer, you don't get more points. And I think Anastasia had like 5. And the game we just played, I had 4. I guess Nick did get 5 down, and Anastasia got 3, but it just felt like we were putting down less, and it might just be because of the emergent game state that we were putting less stuff down. And I think part of the reason Nick put so many people down is because he put these victory points on spots where he got resources, and we kept going there. And he's like, Nick, you couldn't spend them fast enough, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was why I came in dead last in this game. Is I didn't understand the resource flow. It actually like dovetails really nicely into a point that I want to make that I actually don't think is good or bad, but is important for people playing this game to like understand. Games have like arcs, right? Like they have a certain like flow to them. And like Great Western Trail you brought up, like is a rondel. It's like you build your system and you're going to like hit this like a couple times, like iterating the same cycle. And this river does have a loop. Like you'll go to the bottom and then go to the top again and continue down. But you're not going to have that long. The game is pretty fast paced. Anything that you're developing in the game, the buildings essentially are the counter of the track. And every time you hit the bottom, it like flushes those things through. So you're not building something that you're going to hit a lot of times. So the game is definitely more on the tactical rather than the strategic side of things, in the sense of like you're trying to get your value, get in, get out. You're getting, the amount of like resources that you're getting are, I think, quite manageable numbers, and you're trying to just get like kind of the right things at the right time, get them out, and move through the game. But you're not building a system that you're going to like hit over and over and over again.
Right.
It's not that the river is long enough that, you build your super spot, and yes, you have 2 boats, but you're only going to be able to hit that spot 2-3 times maybe over the course of the game.
Just enough to make it feel good, but not so much that you're like, you got to make it happen and then make it happen, because the game's going to end before you can hit it any more than that.
And if you're the kind of player who's like looking for a game where you like develop an infrastructure, like this game isn't going to give you the space to do that, which is, I think good. I think it works for this game, but it is important to understand about it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I do think the game is just long enough to give you the satisfaction of building an infrastructure and let you use it just enough to like feel good. It's not like you just got to use it once. You can use it 2 or 3 times, or in my case, have John use it 2 or 3 times.
Thank you.
But it's just long enough to do that without then overstaying its welcome. That is one thing that I really do want to compliment on it. Like in both this play and my first play with John, and it's hard to tell once you start just like playing it on BGA, but like, these plays we had where we were like live and talking through them, there was like this moment about 2/3 of the way through where I was like, or even halfway, where I was like, oh my gosh, the game's going to be over. And then the game lasted just long enough beyond that, again, by the natural pacing of the game. It's like we built a bunch of buildings, but then we were all broke, so we stopped building them, and the buildings are what trigger the end game. And I was like, okay, now there's like, we're doing a couple of things. And so you feel that tension, like the end game is coming, and it can come upon you very quickly. And in a game, that does play in, 45 to 75 minutes, that's fantastic. That's what you want. But I do want to compliment it on like being just the perfect amount of time to be like, nope, I still kind of got to do everything I wanted to do. I feel good. Okay, game's ending. It's not too long. It's not too short. It really did hit like a nice sweet spot for me. And it's very hard for games to do that, in my opinion.
In this first play, I had the opposite emotion. I felt that the game did not give me enough time. Okay, but I do think that's a reflection of a lack of experience, and that's not to say that I didn't have fun with it. But it definitely gave me an emotion of being pressed in a way that I did not expect from the like rules teach at the beginning, which was very easy. I was like, oh, okay, cool. We're gonna like build this stuff up, right? Like the game that when you buy your buildings on the river, they have different prices based on how many different spots on the river they touch, essentially. And I was like, oh, cool. I'll buy one of the expensive ones because it touches many spots. And that was a rookie mistake.
That is also, I should say, another factor between 3 and 2 is even though I think the game is paced out longer, there are more boats, I do think, but I just think naturally when you have 3 people doing things, you're going to do a little bit less. And I did feel that ever so slightly in this game where I was like, I didn't get to go quite as much.
Is it the same number of
buildings? There are more. It's not the same number of buildings.
There are 4 more buildings in a 3-player game than there is in a 2-player game. And there's like 23 total or something. So 4 is not a tiny amount, but also not a lot when you consider you added an entire another person.
But
then again, I only built 3 buildings.
Anastasia's point of like it's you don't have the same amount of time in the different player counts.
Right.
Exactly. It's still it's still balanced for that, but not quite as much. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think part of it also probably has to do with some of the strategy that can come into play. Like this is a pretty tactical game. You're rolling a die to see what you can do on your next turn. And again, you can accrue something to let you modify it, but if you really need a 2 and you roll a 5 and you only have 1 of the manipulation, then you got to come up with a new plan. But in this play, I got 3 merchants down. Actually, I want to talk about the deliveries, the clients a little bit. There are 5 different types, and they all have kind of vibes with different things within them. But the merchants activate, they give you a benefit when you loop around the track. And I started the game with 2 merchants in my hand. You always have 2 in your hand. And I drew a 3rd one as soon as I played the first merchant down. And I got all 3 of my merchants down before I looped the track once. Like I was really slowly working down with my first 2 boats. And I managed to get 3 of these things down. I'm still not even sure how I did that without actually crossing over. I think I just inched down the river. And with my plan being, like, I'm building a loop around the river engine. Now I have 3 of these people. One of them gave me a point for every person I'd put down every time I went around. One of them gave me the change your die juice. Another one gave me reputation, which we'll talk about soon. And I got that 3rd person down, and I looked up, and the game was like, 2/3 over, it felt like, or like halfway over. And I was like, wait, but I just did the cool thing. Now I want to run the cool thing, like what Nick was just saying.
Yep.
And I think I did manage to hit it 3 times. But also, once I had that built, I was just like slamming the river, which probably really pushed the end game. Because every time you every time you loop, you push the end game trigger some more. So like Nick, you were saying, it just seemed like we were just going, and like Anastasia kept constructing buildings, which pushed the end game, and I was trying to make my boats be speed boats because I had that benefit for it. Maybe it won't be quite as fast. I mean, we played in 60 minutes, which is blisteringly fast. And also,
crazy.
Just to clarify,
especially for the mental space.
Just to clarify, this was 60 minutes on Tabletop Simulator. Like BGA does all the math and stuff, but this was essentially like we were sitting around a table playing the game.
Yeah, I'm gonna bet it's not gonna be. It's gonna be, probably an hour. Maybe 90 minutes
with slow people.
Set it
maybe
up.
It gets up to 90.
Yeah. I mean, I guess this is sort of a question for Nick, but it's like, at least the way Jonathan and I felt when we sat down, it was like, there are a lot of symbols. There are a lot of things. It feels like it looks and feels like it's going to be a lot more overwhelming than what the game actually
100%.
is.
Yeah. The icon wall is real. But the icons mostly don't. They're not like too difficult, and they aren't the core, right? The core system. Since we're talking about Great Western Trail, like you need to understand the icons because every building has the icons, and that's the action that you're taking. This one, the core system of the actions that you're taking doesn't require you to actually understand the icons. The icons are more like, okay, why do I care about playing this specific card? Well, I'll just get the resources and play. Like you can kind of muddle your way there in your first play, and halfway through you'll be like, okay, cool, I understand what everything is. So I agree that it looks very intimidating. Even the rule book's pretty skinny, but like just looking at all the things, you're like, I don't know how this connects to that, but it is more accessible than it appears on the surface.
While I just mentioned customers, and I want to say kind of one last thing about them. I think they're really cool. It sounds silly to be like, oh, the recipe fulfillment is cool, but when you put a customer down, they give you something immediately. They also give you an ongoing power, and they give you an end game victory point thing. Usually, there's one that's just all about end game points. But I think that's so cool because I think oftentimes in games where like you get a bunch of resources, then you spend them for the card that's going to get you points. Points are boring. But in this game, it gets you points and stuff immediately and stuff ongoing. I think it's cool that every single one of these cards is like that. Like I would have expected some cards to be ongoing and some cards to be end game and some cards to be like a big thing immediately. And this game just wraps all 3 of those things into most of the cards, which makes them even more fun to play. And then they give you a bunch of points.
Yeah, the contracts are more interesting than they are in many games. I agree.
We haven't talked about is
the 6 tracks on the board.
Talked about the 6 tracks on the board. Yeah, let's talk about those.
Yeah, it's we mentioned reputation, and we mentioned that it's a 6-sided die. And when you roll a 3, that lets you build in the 3 area. Every time you construct a building, you also usually get reputation in that area. So I build a building, it has a 3 on it. Now I get 3 reputation. I probably shouldn't keep saying 3, but essentially by constructing in the 3 zone, I get reputation on the 3 track. That's why there are 6 different tracks, and they are bog standard majority tracks. There's points on them. The person who goes farthest on the track gets big points. Second farthest gets middle points. Maybe third gets small points. But you get this reputation from building, but also from activating the buildings. And there's also bennies on those tracks. Like, oh, if I go here,
love the bennies.
I'm going to get a pot, and then that's cool. Or I get the 2 money that I needed.
The tracks are probably my least favorite part on first pass. I don't generally like tracks in games, and it's not area majority scoring, but it kind of is area majority scoring, which is like one of my least favorite scoring mechanisms in a game. So it's every game needs to figure out a way that they convert all these actions that you're doing into points, and this is the way that this game has figured it out. To me, it's not terribly inspiring, but it also is like familiar, so it allows you to focus more on the parts of the game that are interesting by making this kind of scoring system be, in my opinion, kind of boring.
I agree with you, Nick, that this is the way that the game has come up with to give you points, right? Absolutely. But what I most like the tracks for is that on the second space of every track is a resource.
Yeah.
And so the fact that when you build a building, that's the only thing you get when you build the building. We talk about the bonuses you get from the buildings when you're sailing, but the only thing you get when you build them is this reputation. And I love that. There have been points when I've been playing where I'm like, man, all I need is one silk. And I'm like, the best way to get that silk? I'm going to go build, a building in the 6 area, and I'm going to move up the 6 track, and that's going to give me a silk. Fantastic. And not only do I have that silk, now I'm ahead of my opponents, and because they haven't built yet, and I'm kind of pushing along on that track. And then everyone on the 5th space gives you coins. They're very just enough, but not so much that it also doesn't add a ridiculous amount of additional thought. It seems like it's going to, but they're all kind of the same. And so you can kind of look at them and kind of be like, this is just another opportunity for me to get a little bit of money or for me to get an extra divine intervention. And as you kind of keep going up, I've only seen this happen in one of my games, but when you get all the way to the end, you actually get, I think it's 3 points per resource. Very hard to do that, but it is
3 points and a resource of your choice. Wow.
Oh,
yeah.
is that what that is?
I've never even gotten close, but that sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like a track just for the sake of a track, but I do think that when you're starting to kind of get into more of like, how are you going to play this game to not only have fun with it, but also to win with it? I think there's some interesting things to find in those tracks, and I like that.
I'm pretty ambivalent towards them. I think I lean a little bit more towards Nick. My biggest problem with them is that there are 6 of them, which is a lot. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
I mean,
it is a lot.
When we played on Board Game Arena, which is, very flat kind of 2D, I just straight up ignored them, which I could do because Board Game Arena took care of everything for me. And it was just too much. Not because I was like overwhelmed by the game. It just, I don't know, just something about it. It just seemed like I kept joking. It was like a bridge too far for me to care about in that first play. And then our scores were really close at the end. And then in this play, we're in Tabletop Simulator. So we have that 3-dimensional vibe. We're all very experienced with TTS, so we're not slow in it. Like, it feels like we're at the table. And I was able to see the tokens pop a little bit more, better able to tell. But it's still so many tracks. And I think one time in this entire game, I had like option A or B, and A moved me up the tree track and B moved me up the fish track, and I was like, the fish track's better. And so I did the thing and I went up the fish track. Every other time I gained reputation, it's because I was doing something else to go up. And we did final scoring, and I was like, oh wow, I was number one in the best one, because it's variable number of points, and one of them was 12 points for being highest up. And I was surprised. I didn't even notice. I was just like, oh, I happen to be a majority. I'm literally the best one. But 6 tracks is so many. It's just it's a lot. And there's snake tracks too, which makes it even harder to parse like at a glance. Like if they were just a straight track, I feel like that would be a little bit easier to just like glance over. But they're trying to cram a lot on a long board. And so I understand why the tracks are as they are. But yeah.
I do want to talk about something that we didn't play with in our game tonight. And I know that, Jonathan, you haven't played with in either of your games either, but I did get a chance to play with in my other games. And that is, I think it's called the Clan Patrons mini expansion. Basically, it's asymmetric powers. That's what it is. It's an optional thing that you can play with. It is something, I read the designer diary on this, and I guess it's something that they added in based on feedback. I went and watched the Dice Tower talking about it. They were like, you should always play with this. Like, we love them, always play with them. And they also pointed out something that I guess one of the complaints is that maybe it makes the game a little bit too easy. My feeling is that it adds a little bit too much overhead to a game that already has quite a bit of overhead in your first play or even your early plays, because it's just like one more thing to think about. But I'm really curious if you think that having these would have helped you at all or been interesting for you at all, because they each one gives a little bit of a different power that you get. It's a little bit of focus, but it's also a little game-breaking ability, and I honestly don't know where I fall on them. Sorry, I hate it when I do that, because I wish I knew, because I liked it both ways. Anyways, I'm curious your guys' thoughts, just taking a look at them.
My gut instinct is that playing these in the first game like is not a good call. They're playing just like the core game is. There's plenty enough to pay attention to that, like using my special power, it can be like a trap sometimes, right? Or you like learn a bad lesson when you're learning a game. So I wouldn't have used these in a first game playing with someone. My mind immediately jumps on seeing these to the capitalists in Furnace, where it's like they have this little power. It breaks
Nick
the rules
nailing
of
it with
game.
the game references.
My comparisons are on point.
Yeah, on point tonight.
I mean, this game is so Euro that it's like, how could I not compare it to these other Euros, right?
Yeah.
And I suspect that it will feel the same as those Furnace leaders, where like mostly they feel fun and different, and not too obtrusive, but definitely powerful. And then people will figure out that like, this one feels like it's definitely better than these other ones. Just on quick glance, like there are a few that like perked my eyes a little bit more than the rest of them.
I've not played with them, but I had the similar feeling. I mean, I'm a bit of a asymmetric player power hater in Euros, so I guess it's not too surprising. But yeah, I like some of them. Like one of them, it's just like get an extra 3 points every time you deliver a customer. And like we already talked about, like customers are really good. You should be doing that already. And when this person's kind of focused on it, another person is like, here's $10 at the beginning of the game.
Well, first customer, I want to every time you deliver the first customer in a region. So it limits a little bit.
Right,
but yeah, keep going.
Just like a glance over. Another one gets you a bunch of money. And then when you build, you can build anywhere. You're not restricted by the die. Another one lets you set the die by spending. Breaking. So like, yeah, they seem like they, break each little element of the game. But I just worry that, like, if I had the get $10 and you can build anywhere person, like Nick said, the trap, like, I'm just going to be like, I got to keep building because I can, because that's my thing. Whereas I kind of, I guess my hot take is I would probably never play with them unless I played with people who really wanted to, because I like starting with symmetry in Euro games. Like I like feeling like if I won, I did it because I made really good choices, not, well, my power feels like it might be a little bit better, or like in this specific situation. Like sometimes a power is good in game A and bad in game B, but like both of those don't feel great. If you feel like you won because of your power or you lost because of your power, I mean, I might be reading into it too much. Maybe they're perfectly balanced, but that's kind of where I land looking at these overall.
Yeah. I mean, I think, obviously I talked about my experience with them a little bit, and I think, just to, you just described kind of the essence of kind of like what you get from them. I think that if you're playing this game and you're enjoying kind of the kind of micro engine building element that you can kind of do for yourself, and you want to lean into that a little bit harder, I think playing with these clan patrons would give you that a little bit more in the game. At least that's been my experience. It's push you in a different direction. And it's also going to, give your opponent an equally quote unquote game breaky, right? Or changing some major element of the game. But the Furnace example is a perfect one. It's like the system, I think, works really well as it is. And what I do really like about having them included in the game is that if you do play it a lot and you think it's a little samey, then you have these, and that is going to create a very different experience each time. If that's something you want to lean into, or you kind of bounce off the base game and want like a little bit more, I do think they make things a little bit looser and give you even more abilities. Yeah. So they're fun to play with.
One thing I'm kind of curious to hear about from Anastasia, just because you're the wizened expert at this game with your 5 plays.
48 hour
is how the scores have played out with doing different things. Like my data set is I played this game twice, and in the first game I like to think I was not complaining, but I was just like, oh, I think I'm losing. Like Anastasia had like 30 points and I had like 16 going into final scoring, and it felt like she was further ahead on me on all these tracks that I wasn't really paying attention to. And then the dust settled on scoring, and I beat you by a handful of points. And we were both like, what? And it's like, well, I wasn't doing this, but that's because I was doing that. And then in this game, like we briefly mentioned, there are these goals that you race towards. In this one, first person to build 3 of the same type of building gets 7 points. Second person gets 5 points. And I barely did that in this game. And at one point I was like, I wonder if I could win by doing none of these. I ended up doing one of them. I got a second place in one of the 3. I didn't even put my token down on the others, whereas Anastasia got your token down on all 3 of them, 2 of them in the very first spot. So you got a ton of points from that. And I beat you by 3 points. Again, not gloating, just like, it's interesting the way the scores line up. And I'm curious from your other plays, like, Does it seem like the scores are kind of tight no matter what you're doing?
So looking at the 3 games I played last night on BGA, it looks like all of the scores were in the 70s and 80s. So all very close.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to love like I love me some BGA data, but like love a game that like, you're coming in and you're just seeing your scores be really tight. I'm just looking at these 2-player games and I'm 30% of my score seemed to be my in-game score. Of course that varied. And then 30% of my score came from my customers and the customer bonuses. And then the other 30% came from the majorities. And then it's just where was I able to kind of like edge that a little bit higher. Mm-hmm. This is one of those games where like you can't get points from a bunch of different places. I happen to really like that because I like that I was scoring a bunch of points in the game and then John went and ended up beating me because he got points elsewhere in the game, right? Like I thought like that made it really balanced. I liked that like, when I felt like I was a little behind in a different game I was playing, I was like, oh, but I'm ahead on all the tracks. Cool. I'm like still in it. So you can see like that balances it out.
I think you just kind of bumped into something that I want to expand upon a little bit, and that was like interaction. I never paid attention to what your dice were. I never paid attention to where your boats were. The only thing I paid attention to, and I mentioned the first game I didn't at all, was the tracks. I think that's intentional. Like I think this is, and I kind of wanted to highlight that because, a lot of Euro games have a lot of indirect interaction where, worker placement, like I'm going to go in that spot. Now you can't go in that spot. I don't think there's a single moment in this game where anybody did something and somebody else said, dang it. Like we never, but there were multiple times where somebody did something and somebody else said, ooh. And I think that's just
a lot of positive interaction.
A vibe of the game I kind of wanted to highlight because some people aren't going to like that. But I like interaction. I like getting in other people's way sometimes, but also sometimes I just like a game that's just a fire hose of stuff, but not too much. Like it maybe not a fire hose. It's like a running tap that I'm able to drink exactly the right amount of, even when it's not my turn. Which means some people might not think it's crazy competitive or whatnot. Like it's incredibly multiplayer solitaire, I guess is like from an action perspective. But it also means you can't really block my turn, which I like.
Yeah, there's not that like getting in your way. I guess the only way you could block someone is if you built the building they want to build, but the buildings are close enough to each other that you could just like proxy into something else.
It seems so unlikely, and it'll be an accident if it happens.
Yeah, and you're like racing for the points in these various areas. I do think that there is like interaction in the sense of like, oh, I might choose to like change my die to this number and do this in this order rather than waiting for it because I am racing with you. So I think that there is definitely space for players who are looking for that interactivity, but the game allows you to not care about what other people are doing and still live your life just fine.
Yeah. I think the 2 major places where you're going to feel the interaction the most, other than obviously the tracks and that kind of, but the 2 places you're going to feel it are in the masteries and then the end game. I think is the other thing, and it reminds me a little bit of Anno 1800 in that way, where it's like, sure, we're not. The major points of interaction in that game are again like, are you going to take the thing that I need, right? But also, when are you going to end the game? And I think that that's really what plays out here. Like, when are you going to end the game? Will I have time to do everything that I want to do? And then also like Anno 1800, the other space is a lot of that positive interaction. It's, what am I going to get? What am I going to get from you doing this? What are your buildings going to give me? And so I actually feel like this is, for as much as you are just kind of focused on the thing you're doing, this is actually one of the least solitaire feeling multiplayer solitaire games, that I've played.
Yeah. I mean, probably partly because you get a lot of stuff when it's not your turn. So like you're not sitting there and
love a game that does that.
Yeah.
Did this game remind either of you of White Castle?
Yeah, for sure.
No, but I get
no?
it. Yeah, no, I mean, I totally get it. I feel like I've just been like blind to comparisons all this whole podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, oh my god, White Castle, totally.
But it reminded you, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, for a couple reasons. The one I think that is the big picture is that both of them are pretty quick, pack a fair amount of game Euro. Like in an hour or 90 minutes, you get like a lot of these sort of mechanics. Both of them have a tight number of actions, but like Benny trails that just give you stuff along the way. Both of them are basically themeless, point scoring games.
with beautiful components and this like rich Asian art. Like they're gorgeous games.
And dice, and they both
and
do
dice.
the same thing.
That
where
was
they
the
say
thing.
like
And dice.
right. Well, but the point is that like the dice are semi-controllable, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Semi-controllable,
it's like,
but
you're not
dice
drafting
placement,
them, but you
dice.
can change them. Yeah.
Nope. Dice dictated actions, tight spaces, not overly long, really interesting decisions, and then all the pieces kind of like fitting together.
That interconnection.
Interconnection. You do this and it kind of feeds into this and do this. My take on this game, the funny thing is that like for as much as this game reminds me of White Castle, they're also both so different. Like, so that for me, like one of the reasons I liked it so much is I'm actually a really big fan of White Castle, and which is a game that, if you're not familiar, that came out last year, which we actually never did an episode on.
We kept
Maybe we'll
talking
do that
about
one
doing
day.
an episode, and we kept not doing it.
We still might.
We might. Now we might. So okay, well, we might do that. But it's I think there's a playthrough of it on John's channel, so you can check that out if you want to see a comparison. But my description for this game is like, and I think one of the reasons I liked it so much is like dice games where you select your actions based on dice is just one of my top mechanics. Probably is my top mechanic. I just love it. I love adding luck into a game like that. And for me, what this game is, it's White Castle. If you played White Castle and you were like, there's only 9 turns and like it's agonizing decisions and like of course it pops off in all of these crazy ways and it's a great game. But if you want to play White Castle and have a totally different experience, a totally different game, but with a similar vibe and a similar level of satisfaction, but get to take less agonizing turns because you strictly just get to take more of them, then I think you're really going to like this. And I really liked it. And I very carefully am making that comparison and saying, like, I can own both of those games and feel like they are very different. This is not a versus for me. This is a White Castle is a great game, and I think this is a great game. And I've just really enjoyed them both.
Yeah, I like the comparison. They are definitely quite different in the interaction. Like, there's lots of swearing when I play White Castle.
It's definitely a tighter game.
Things can be blocked and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think that
That's a good point.
They hit a very similar feel. I mean, I guess to kind of wrap up my feelings on this game, I'm gonna get it. I don't know how, but like this game is like, we were halfway through our 3-player game and I was just like, yep, I'm buying this. Like, this is so cool.
There's a little more glowing praise that you can give than that. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, especially like in this conversation when like you mentioned Great Western Trail and I was like, that's right. That's I think that's the big reason. This is hitting a button that I've been wanting to be hit for a while for me. And also as a rules teacher, we haven't really harped on this too much, but like it's so simple to teach. This game is like easier to teach than White Castle, and I feel like White Castle is surprisingly easy to teach. And the other thing that, you know, from like an endorphin hit perspective, and again, I think one of the reasons I like it so much and why I'm going to be getting a copy that reminds me of White Castle is that it gives you a lot of little things at the same time. White Castle is a pop-offy game. I'm not going to go into details of that, but there's a subtle thing in that game that like it cheats you, it lies to you into making you think that you did more on your turn. And River of Gold does that every time you move down that river, because every spot is next to 4 spots. It's not like, oh, I go onto the spot. What's on the spot? I get $3. Cool, I'm done. Every single spot is next to 4 things. At the start of the game, most of them give you $1. So like you go to the thing, you're like 1 + 1 + 1
still,
+ 3.
$4.
But still 4. And again, it tricks you because it's 1 + 1 + 1 + 2 reputation. It's not 3 Koku, I guess it's called in this game. And I think that's like, this is not a pop-offy game. There are a couple moments I was able to build a little bit of an engine every time I circled around where I had a long turn because I was kind of popping off in that moment. But in general, it isn't. But it makes me feel like it is. Like almost like every time I move down the river, it feels like I did a combo, even though I didn't. And I think that's kind of brilliant. So yeah, I mean, I'm a really big fan. I played it for the first time 2 days ago, and I'm sold.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to play it again, which I thought was really high praise until you said you were going to buy it. So I don't know if I can compare with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited to play it some more and see what it looks like. I suspect like with most 2 to 4 player games, I'm going to prefer it at 4 players rather than 2 players.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine because
yeah.
I liked that, that interaction of like how the buildings work and everything like that with multiple people. So I suspect that's going to be where I land. I think I said this right at the beginning, but I really want to hit it home because it's definitely my favorite part about this game. The roll the die, and then you have 4 possible actions, maybe 3 possible actions, depending on how cooperative your die is or your hand is or anything like that. And then that is enough space to make an interesting choice. And I really like how discrete the actions in this game are. That's part of the thing that lends to its snappiness, that makes you feel like you played a full game in a pretty tight period of time.
Yep. Couldn't agree with you more. I love every single comparison that Nick made tonight. Great Western Trail, top 10 game, Castles of Burgundy, top 10, 15 game. Like, even some of the ways, even when John was teaching it, he was like, oh, it's got like a little Concordia feel. It has nothing to do with Concordia, but there's a similar feel in the simplicity of your turn and the way the game ends. I made a connection to Anno 1800. It reminds me of Grand Austria Hotel. I mean, like, I just listed off a bunch of my, top 10 games, and it gives me little vibes of that. And it's really fun to, every year more games come out, and, I know we joke like it's not already in my mailbox, but like I've actually really stopped, kind of in a like, cool, I'm gonna kind of shave down my collection. I'm really kind of not trying to add, and I didn't expect, every year I'm like, I don't know, a bunch of new games, we'll see. And it's so fun to come across a game that again continues to innovate and continues to take little pieces from a bunch of different Euros, and we can say, oh, okay, we've Franken Euroed another Franken Euro, but like done it in a really cool way that's really fun, feels fresh, and just like White Castle last year, just kind of takes it and plays with it, and has made a great, fast, God, I love a Euro that can play in 60 minutes, and you could do 2 games in a row, and I love that, and I've really been enjoying it, so I'm looking forward to it. I think I'm probably going to go buy it right now, so I can play.
Great. So that'll bring us to the end of our impressions conversation on River of Gold. If you are listening to the podcast version of this and you want to weigh in, head on over to the YouTube version so you can drop a comment. We'd love to hear, like, have you played this game? What was your impression? What stood out to you? And thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks all. Bye.